It started with a question that even Buckingham Palace couldn't answer. How far would a woman go to make the world believe her love story was destiny, not design? Because according to Lady Colin Campbell, what unfolded between Prince Harry and Meghan Markle wasn't a fairy tale. It was a meticulously staged act, one fueled by manipulation, emotional warfare, and a threat so dark it allegedly pushed Harry to the edge of his own sanity. The night everything changed wasn't filled with royal pageantry or flashing cameras. It was silent. Behind heavy drapes in a mansion that was never meant to be theirs, Harry sat at the edge of the bed, staring into nothing. Meghan was crying, not softly, but the kind of sob that demanded attention. And as Lady C would later claim, those tears weren't from heartbreak, they were a weapon. Because when love turns into leverage, even a prince can become a pawn. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. But let's rewind. How did we get here? How did a woman from Hollywood walk into the most powerful monarchy on earth and rewrite its story in less than 2 years? How did Prince Harry, once the cheeky, beloved soldier prince, end up alienated from his family, his home, and everything that once defined him? Lady Colin Campbell, known for her sharp tongue and impeccable royal sources, says the truth lies in what the palace never wanted the public to see. She claims Meghan wasn't just misunderstood, she was calculating, strategic, and ruthless in her ambition. She knew exactly what she was doing. Lady C once told an interviewer, Harry was emotionally fragile, and she exploited that vulnerability masterfully. Now, that's a bold accusation. But before you roll your eyes and say, oh, another royal conspiracy, pause for a moment. Because the evidence, the patterns of behavior, the contradictions, the perfectly timed public appearances, they all start to tell a story that feels too coordinated to be coincidence. Remember when Meghan first entered the royal scene? The narrative was intoxicating. The first biracial duchess, the modern fairy tale bride. The media lapped it up, the palace smiled, and the public thought they were witnessing history. But Lady C insists that beneath the surface, Meghan was already setting the stage for her future, a future where she would no longer need the royal family, only their spotlight. It's said that before Meghan even met Harry, she studied Princess Diana obsessively, not out of admiration, but out of strategy. Friends claimed she watched old interviews, learned Diana's posture, her voice, even her expressions of vulnerability. To the public, that might seem like innocent emulation. But to those who saw through it, it was performance. Calculated, emotional performance. And that's where Harry comes in. Because by the time he met Meghan, he was already haunted by his mother's death and resentful of the institution he believed failed her. Lady C argues that Meghan recognized that wound instantly, and instead of healing it, she deepened it. She mirrored his pain, Lady C explained. She made him feel seen, understood, even avenged. And once you make a wounded man believe you're his savior, he'll follow you anywhere, even away from his throne. Now, imagine the weight of that realization. A prince, groomed from birth to serve the crown, suddenly turning his back on his bloodline, convinced that the only person who truly loves him is the one telling him the royals are against him. That's not romance. That's conditioning. Lady Colin says the early warning signs were everywhere. The sudden secrecy around their courtship, the refusal to follow standard royal press rules, the way Meghan allegedly tested the palace staff, pushing boundaries to see how far she could go before anyone pushed back. She wasn't trying to fit in, Lady C insists. She was trying to see how much power she could take before anyone noticed. And people did notice. Behind the polished photos and glowing interviews, there was tension. Lady C described whispers among royal aides who referred to Meghan as Hurricane Meg. Charming in public, explosive in private. The royal household had weathered storms before, but never one that came from inside. Still, for a while it worked. Meghan had the public on her side, the palace cautiously accommodating her every request, and Harry completely devoted. But Lady C says it was never enough. Meghan wanted to be adored on her own terms, not as the Duchess of Sussex, but as Meghan Markle, global icon. So, when that global adoration began to waver, when stories leaked that painted her as demanding, when the fairy tale began to crack, something inside her snapped. And that's where Lady C's most disturbing revelation comes in, the suicidal ultimatum. According to her, Meghan allegedly told Harry that if he didn't choose her over his family, she couldn't go on living. Think about that. For a man already traumatized by losing his mother to what he saw as a cruel system, that kind of threat wasn't just emotional manipulation, it was the perfect weapon. Picture it. Harry standing there, torn between his wife and his bloodline, terrified of history repeating itself. He saw Diana's ghost in Meghan's tears. He saw the press ready to pounce, the world watching, and a choice he couldn't bear to make. And that's how, Lady C claims, the prince who once promised to protect the monarchy ended up walking away from it. But the story didn't end there. The night of the alleged ultimatum didn't just end one chapter of royal life. It began an internal panic within the palace. There were emergency meetings, hushed phone calls, and conflicting reports. Some insiders, Lady C says, feared for Harry's safety. Others feared for the monarchy's reputation. Because if this ever leaked, if the public learned that emotional blackmail might have driven a royal prince to exile, it could destroy centuries of royal mystique. Now here's where it gets even darker. Lady C suggests that after that night, the palace made a silent decision to let Harry go, to protect the crown at all costs. Not to intervene, not to confront, but to quietly allow his downfall to play out on his own terms. That's the kind of cold calculation that defines royal survival. But what did Meghan gain? Everything she'd ever wanted: independence, global attention, control of her narrative. And what did Harry lose? His family, his purpose, his title, and possibly himself. Lady Colin Campbell's insight paints this as less of a love story and more of a psychological chess match, where the king never realized he'd already been cornered. The emotional irony is haunting. Meghan's entire public image is built on empathy, compassion, and healing. Yet behind the scenes, Lady C paints her as a woman who weaponized emotion to get her way. The palace, meanwhile, portrayed itself as calm and composed while internally scrambling to contain a scandal it couldn't afford to expose. Everyone was pretending. Everyone was playing their role. And yet, the question lingers. Was it all Meghan's fault? Or was Harry complicit, willingly blind to the manipulation because it gave him what he always wanted? Escape? Lady C's words make one thing clear. Harry didn't just leave because of love. He left because of a threat, a choice, and a moment that forever altered the royal narrative. Imagine the weight of that decision. A man torn between two worlds, the rigid tradition of the crown and the chaotic freedom of Hollywood. A woman torn between love and control, compassion and calculation. It's not just a royal scandal, it's a psychological tragedy. And that's what makes Lady Colin's revelations so explosive. Because if she's right, then the royal exit wasn't about independence or modernity. It was about survival. Not Meghan's, not Harry's, but the monarchy's itself. The palace may have survived, but at what cost? The family was fractured. The brothers stopped speaking. The queen, heartbroken, retreated into silence. And Harry, the boy who once laughed at trooping the color, became the man who couldn't bear to face his homeland. As Lady C put it, he didn't choose Meghan over his family. He chose the illusion of peace over the pain of truth. And that illusion, it came with a price. Because what followed after that night, the whispers, the leaks, the quiet unraveling of royal control, would expose more than anyone ever expected. Lady C's claims weren't just rumors anymore. They were a roadmap to the destruction of a dynasty. But before we uncover how that destruction unfolded, before we reveal the confrontations, the lies, and the private tapes that Lady C claims still exist, we have to go back to the very beginning, to the woman who walked into the world's most powerful family and outplayed them all. Because that's where this story truly begins, and what comes next will make even the palace's darkest secrets look tame. They said she was different, modern, a breath of fresh air for a family still living in the shadow of its own history. But Lady Colin Campbell said something else, something the palace desperately hoped no one would ever repeat. She didn't just marry into royalty, Lady C whispered in one of her interviews. She infiltrated it. That word, infiltrated, wasn't chosen lightly. Because, according to Lady Colin, Meghan Markle didn't stumble into Prince Harry's life by accident. She studied it. She planned it. She played it like a game she fully intended to win. And if you think that sounds dramatic, you haven't heard the half of it. Long before the world even knew her name, Meghan was already practicing the art of reinvention. Los Angeles-born, Hollywood-bred, and ambitious beyond imagination. She wasn't content to be just another actress in another forgettable TV show. She wanted to be remembered. And Lady Colin Campbell claims that Meghan's vision of power went far beyond red carpets and magazine covers. It was something deeper, something more dangerous. But how do you outsmart an institution that's lasted for over 1,000 years? Simple. You don't attack the system, you charm it. You make them think you belong, while quietly rewriting the rules behind their backs. Lady C describes Meghan as a master of the mirror. She mirrored whoever she needed to impress. To producers, she was humble and hardworking. To humanitarian circles, she was compassionate and articulate. To Harry, she was everything he didn't know he was searching for: warmth, empathy, validation. But Lady C says that wasn't chance. It was choreography. It began, as many royal stories do, with Diana. Meghan idolized her, and not just as a humanitarian or mother figure, but as a symbol. Diana had shown the world that one woman could challenge the monarchy and win hearts while doing it. Meghan wanted that same magic, but without Diana's tragedy. She studied her tapes, her interviews, her pauses between tears. Lady C claims Meghan used those mannerisms as part of a scripted authenticity that disarmed anyone watching. And when Harry appeared, wounded, rebellious, still struggling to find meaning, Meghan saw her moment. Lady C calls it the perfect storm of vulnerability. Harry was desperate for connection. Meghan was desperate for transformation. Their collision wasn't fate, it was opportunity. Lady Colin says, Meghan knew exactly what Harry needed to hear. She echoed his pain, amplified his resentment, and convinced him that she was the only one who truly understood him. And perhaps she did, because for the first time, Harry felt seen, not as a prince, not as a spare, but as a man who had been overshadowed all his life. Meghan didn't compete with his trauma. She absorbed it, wrapped herself in it, and turned it into intimacy. But here's where the story twists. According to Lady C, Meghan's affection came with conditions. Control disguised as concern. Subtle manipulation masked as love. She didn't just want Harry's heart. She wanted his loyalty, his identity, his narrative. In private, Lady C says Meghan challenged every boundary the palace held sacred. She wanted access, approval, and autonomy, all at once. When royal aides tried to enforce protocol, Meghan reportedly bristled. "Why can't I do things my way?" she would ask. And when they explained it was tradition, she allegedly replied, "Then the tradition is wrong." That phrase, "the tradition is wrong," became the whisper that haunted Kensington Palace. Because it wasn't just defiance. It was a declaration of war. Lady C paints a picture of a duchess who understood exactly how to manipulate public sympathy. She positioned herself as a victim of outdated customs, knowing the modern audience would rally behind her. The palace, bound by its own silence, couldn't fight back. Every time Meghan pushed, they yielded, afraid of being called racist, sexist, or cruel. And with every inch they gave, she gained a mile of power. But let's not forget, Meghan's genius wasn't just in defying rules. It was in rewriting perception. She made the world believe that every criticism was persecution. Every act of rebellion was bravery. Every rift she caused was someone else's fault. And the more she painted herself as misunderstood, the more Harry clung to her. Lady Colin Campbell calls this the performance of a lifetime. And it was working, until the cracks began to show. Behind palace walls, tension was reaching a boiling point. Staff who had once adored Meghan were quietly resigning. Royal aides whispered about broken boundaries and outbursts. There were stories of slammed doors, tearful assistants, and phone calls that left senior staff trembling. Lady C alleges that Meghan ruled her household not with kindness, but with fear, and Harry defended her every time. Imagine that dynamic. A prince torn between his wife's pain and his family's silence. A woman who believed every criticism was betrayal. A palace terrified of what would happen if they pushed back. It wasn't a marriage anymore. It was a chessboard. And Meghan, Lady C insists, was always 3 moves ahead. In one chilling anecdote, Lady C recalls a private source describing Meghan's attitude toward the Queen's courtiers. When told she couldn't bring her own photographer to an event, Meghan allegedly snapped, "Then the Queen can have her event without me." The arrogance shocked even the most seasoned aides. But what shocked them more was that Harry backed her up. Why? because she'd already convinced him that the palace didn't respect him, that they never had. Lady C says Meghan weaponized his insecurities, echoing the very wounds the institution inflicted. They don't love you, she'd allegedly say. They just tolerate you because of your title. Those words hit harder than any royal reprimand ever could. And slowly, Harry began to believe them. Lady Colin claims that's when Meghan truly outsmarted the palace. Not through rebellion, but through persuasion. Not by defying the Queen directly, but by convincing her grandson that the monarchy itself was toxic. Once that seed was planted, the rest was inevitable. The palace, blind to what was unfolding behind closed doors, continued to present the couple as the future of the monarchy. The world saw smiles and hand-holding. The staff saw tension and manipulation. And Lady C, watching from her stately home with decades of royal insight, saw the oldest pattern of all, the rise of the outsider who thought she could beat the system. But here's the twist Lady C emphasizes most. Meghan didn't just want acceptance. She wanted control. Every decision, every headline, every image had to serve her narrative. She reportedly micromanaged everything from wardrobe choices to camera angles, ensuring she appeared both glamorous and grounded. It was a delicate balance, and it worked beautifully until it didn't. Because no matter how good the act, even the best mask eventually slips. Lady C says that moment came when Meghan realized the palace would never bend completely. There would always be rules she couldn't rewrite, people she couldn't charm, titles she couldn't turn into trademarks. That realization didn't humble her, it enraged her. The woman who once played the role of dutiful duchess now began planning her exit. But not just any exit. A public liberation. One that would make her the victim and the victor at the same time. Lady Colin Campbell calls it the perfect ending to Act 1. The American actress who married a prince would soon become the global icon who defied a monarchy. But before that transformation could happen, something else was brewing. Something darker. Because when the palace began to push back, quietly, subtly, strategically, Meghan pushed harder. She started seeing enemies everywhere. In the press, among the staff, even within Harry's family. Every disagreement became an insult. Every cold glance became proof of betrayal. And while the world was still mesmerized by her smile, the royal family was beginning to realize that the woman they'd welcomed so warmly had already turned the game in her favor. Lady C calls this the turning point. The moment the royal household stopped seeing Meghan as a breath of fresh air and started seeing her as a storm. And Harry? He was already lost in it. Because when you love someone who convinces you the world is against you, you stop trusting everyone else. Even your own blood. Lady Colin Campbell said it best. She didn't just outsmart the palace. She made them doubt their own reflection. But the real question isn't how she did it. It's what she planned to do next. Because once you've outplayed royalty, there's only one thing left to conquer, the narrative itself. And for Meghan Markle, that meant the world stage was waiting. But before she could claim it, one woman, one royal insider who had seen it all, would come face to face with her. And that meeting, Lady Colin says, changed everything. Because that's when the mask slipped. And what Lady C saw behind it would expose the truth about Meghan Markle forever. It wasn't a royal ball. It wasn't a state event. It was something far subtler, a quiet afternoon tea at a private estate, far from flashing cameras and press headlines. Lady Colin Campbell didn't expect much that day, not really. She'd seen it all before. The charmers, the social climbers, the women who thought they could dance with power and not get burned. But this time, she felt something different. From the moment Meghan Markle walked into that room, Lady Colin said she could feel the air change. The Duchess of Drama, that's what Lady C would later call her, had arrived, and every head turned before she even spoke. She knew exactly how to command attention, how to look humble and powerful at the same time. Her smile was rehearsed to perfection, her tone soft enough to sound sincere, but firm enough to demand space. She was captivating, Lady Colin admitted. But it wasn't natural charm. It was strategy. Those words set the tone for everything that followed. Because according to Lady Colin, Meghan didn't simply enter that room. She assessed it. Every glance, every handshake, every carefully timed laugh seemed calibrated. Lady C recalled how Meghan locked eyes with her almost immediately, the way a chess player studies an opponent before making the first move. There was no warmth, no genuine curiosity, just calculation. That was Lady C's first red flag. She looked through you, she said. Not at you, through you. As if she was already deciding whether you were useful or irrelevant. The others at the gathering, of course, were enchanted. They whispered about how Meghan was refreshingly modern, how she brought Hollywood sparkle to the monarchy. But Lady Colin wasn't so easily convinced. She'd been in these circles for decades, long enough to know that people who shine too brightly in public often hide something much darker in private. She reminded me of someone on stage, Lady Colin later told a journalist. Every gesture was a performance. Every word was a line in a script she'd already written. During that first encounter, Lady C observed what she called the Meghan maneuver. It was subtle, almost imperceptible to those who weren't paying attention. Whenever someone spoke, Meghan would tilt her head, smile warmly, and then pivot the conversation back to herself. Always, somehow, she became the center of the narrative. Every topic, whether it was charity, the Queen's dogs, or British culture, eventually circled back to Meghan's experiences, her struggles, her ambitions. At one point, Lady Colin tried to test her. She brought up Princess Diana, carefully, casually, and watched for a reaction. Meghan's eyes lit up instantly. The transformation was almost eerie. She became animated, Lady C said. Her tone changed. It was like invoking a sacred name. And that's when Lady Colin realized it. Meghan didn't just admire Diana, she studied her. The mannerisms, the emotional vulnerability, the way she spoke about feeling misunderstood, all of it was there, layered like an actress inhabiting a role. She didn't want to be Diana's successor, Lady C said. She wanted to be her sequel. But while Meghan spoke with confidence and conviction, Lady C noticed the subtle cracks. The brief flicker of impatience when someone interrupted her. The way she adjusted her posture whenever the conversation shifted away from her. It was as if she couldn't stand to share the spotlight for more than a few seconds, Lady Colin recalled. Still, Lady Colin wasn't one to judge too quickly. She'd seen ambitious women before. She understood that charm could be both a weapon and a shield. But as the afternoon wore on, one moment sealed her suspicion that Meghan's motives went far beyond love or duty. It was a small thing, almost trivial. One of the hosts mentioned the Queen, her discipline, her decades of service, her reputation for modesty. Meghan smiled politely and then said, in a tone Lady C would never forget, "Well, it's a different world now. People need authenticity, not tradition." The room fell silent. To most, it sounded like a harmless modern statement. But to Lady Colin, who had spent years studying royal etiquette, who knew the unspoken weight behind every word, it was a declaration. Meghan wasn't there to adapt to the system. She was there to challenge it. After that day, Lady C couldn't shake the feeling that Meghan was playing a role far larger than anyone realized. She described it as a mixture of brilliance and danger, the kind of charisma that could seduce a prince and unsettle a palace. When she spoke to her close friends afterward, Lady Colin didn't mince words. "She's not here to fit in," she said. "She's here to bend the monarchy to her will." And as bold as that sounded, time would prove her right. Because just months after that encounter, the palace began to change. Rules were being questioned, protocols bent, and Harry, once loyal to the core, was suddenly at odds with everyone around him. Coincidence? Lady Colin didn't think so. She believed she'd seen the seeds being planted that very afternoon. But perhaps the most chilling detail of that first meeting came at the end. As the guests were leaving, Meghan approached Lady Colin directly. The Duchess smiled, the same dazzling, camera-ready smile that could melt headlines, and said, "I've heard a lot about you, Lady Colin. You have quite the reputation." Lady C smiled back and replied, "And you, my dear, are already building yours." They both knew it wasn't a compliment. Lady Colin later said she felt an unspoken tension in that exchange, a power dynamic disguised as politeness. "It was like two predators circling each other," she admitted. "We both understood the game." From that day on, Lady Colin kept a watchful eye on Meghan. She noticed the public gestures, the hand-holding, the carefully choreographed affection, the calculated vulnerability in interviews. She also noticed how swiftly Meghan learned to manipulate the British media, alternately courting it and condemning it depending on what narrative served her best. And with every new headline, Lady Colin's instincts screamed louder. "This isn't love," she told friends privately. "This is a takeover." The more Meghan rose in the public's affection, the more the palace began to fracture behind the scenes. Lady Colin said it was like watching a spell unfold, one that no one seemed able to break. Staff adored her at first, then feared her. The royals tolerated her at first, then resented her. But by the time they realized what was happening, Meghan had already positioned herself as untouchable. The palace had a problem, and her name was Meghan Markle. Lady C recalls hearing from sources within the royal household who described the new Duchess as both intoxicating and exhausting. She could light up a room, then drain it with a single sentence. She was a paradox, warm yet cold, gracious yet calculating. It's as if she rehearsed kindness but resented the people she had to perform it for, one insider allegedly told Lady C. That duality fascinated Lady Colin. It reminded her of another woman she'd once known, someone who charmed everyone before tearing her own world apart. It's the same pattern, Lady C whispered in an interview. The same need to control every perception. But unlike that woman, Meghan had one major advantage. A prince who adored her so completely, he couldn't see the danger. Lady Colin's first encounter became, in her own words, the prologue to a royal tragedy. Because from that moment on, she understood what was coming. She saw how Meghan could dismantle centuries of royal decorum with a smile. How she could make Harry feel like the hero of a story that was slowly destroying him. And the irony? Everyone thought Lady C was just being dramatic. "Oh, that's Lady Colin," they said, always stirring the pot. But within months, the headlines proved her right. The tension between Meghan and the royal family had exploded into public view. The private meetings, the press briefings, the stories of staff resignations, all of it echoed the warnings Lady C had whispered long before. What Lady Colin saw that afternoon wasn't just a woman. It was an agenda wrapped in elegance. And as the Duchess turned her charm toward the Queen herself, the stakes were about to get higher than ever. Because what came next wasn't just a clash of personalities. It was a battle for power. And in that war, Meghan wasn't playing defense. She was preparing to strike. It began quietly. No shouting, no grand confrontation, just a slow, simmering tension behind palace doors. But according to Lady Colin Campbell, it was no less than a silent war. Meghan Markle versus Queen Elizabeth II. Two women from entirely different worlds. One ruled by duty, the other driven by destiny. And somewhere between them stood a bewildered Prince Harry, torn between blood and love, unable to see that the most powerful battle of his life had already begun. Lady Colin often said, "The Queen doesn't fight her wars with swords, she fights them with silence." That silence was Meghan's first mistake. She mistook it for weakness, for approval, maybe even fear. But what Lady C would later reveal is that the Queen saw everything. The manipulation, the rebellion, the subtle way Meghan was shifting the family dynamic. And she made a decision early on, to observe, not react. But for Meghan, that quiet disapproval was unbearable. According to Lady Colin, Meghan entered royal life expecting applause, not protocol. She believed her American work ethic and humanitarian spirit would be embraced instantly. But the monarchy wasn't Hollywood. It didn't care about charisma, it cared about continuity. The crown had survived wars, scandals, and divorces. It didn't bend for personalities. And that was something Meghan couldn't comprehend. She didn't want to learn the rules, Lady Colin said in one interview. She wanted to rewrite them. It started with small things, changes to press engagements, personal staff requests, wardrobe decisions that defied palace dress codes. Every time someone gently reminded her of royal tradition, Meghan reportedly pushed back. "That's outdated," she would say. Or, "It's time the monarchy evolved." Lady Colin said it wasn't defiance, it was calculation. She knew the public loved rebellion. She played the modern card every chance she got. But in royal life, perception is everything. And every time Meghan stepped over the line, it wasn't just an act of independence, it was an act of challenge. The Queen's courtiers began to notice the shift. Rumors trickled through the palace corridors about staff in tears, disagreements over press coverage, and Meghan's alleged refusal to follow hierarchy. Lady Colin claimed that Meghan often dismissed the staff's loyalty to the Queen as blind obedience. That phrase, when it reached senior aides, sent shockwaves. No one, not even Diana, had been that bold in questioning the very foundation of the monarchy. Still, the Queen remained composed. Lady Colin said Her Majesty had lived long enough to recognize the difference between youthful naivety and dangerous ambition. And Meghan, she believed, was not naive. Behind the public smiles and hand-holding photos, there were closed-door meetings. Subtle messages passed through private secretaries. Meghan was reminded of protocol, advised on procedure, and encouraged to adjust her tone with senior courtiers. She ignored most of it. According to Lady Colin, one particular meeting between Meghan and the Queen stands out. It took place shortly after the wedding, when Meghan had begun to gain global media attention. The Queen invited her for tea at Windsor, a gesture of warmth and guidance. But it didn't go as planned. Lady Colin recounts that during this meeting, Meghan arrived late, just a few minutes, but enough to raise eyebrows. When the Queen mentioned the importance of timing and decorum, Meghan reportedly smiled and said, "I'm still adjusting to how things work here." A seemingly harmless line, but to the Queen, it was a signal. This wasn't a woman adjusting. It was a woman asserting. Lady Colin claimed that as the conversation went on, Meghan steered it toward modernity, how the monarchy needed to reflect diversity, compassion, and transparency. All noble ideas, but the Queen sensed something else behind them, a quiet arrogance, a belief that Meghan knew better than centuries of monarchy. The Queen's generation doesn't believe in confrontation, Lady C explained. She doesn't argue. She observes. And she never forgets. After that meeting, insiders say the Queen's tone toward Meghan changed. Still polite, still gracious, but distant, controlled. The warmth of the royal welcome began to cool. Meanwhile, Meghan took the Queen's silence as confirmation that her modern approach was working. She continued to speak about equality and authenticity in her speeches, themes that Lady Colin says subtly undermine the monarchy's hierarchical foundation. She was positioning herself as the reformer, the one who would bring compassion where tradition ruled, Lady Colin said. But in doing so, she was dividing the very structure that gave her power in the first place. And here's where the irony deepened. While Meghan believed she was modernizing the monarchy saw her as weaponizing it. Inside Buckingham Palace, Lady C claims that senior courtiers began quietly referring to her as the Duchess who wanted to be queen. Not literally, of course, but symbolically. Meghan wasn't content with being part of the institution. She wanted to shape it, headline it, dominate it. Lady Colin says that one of Meghan's boldest moves came during a charity event planning meeting. The Queen had long established guidelines for royal charity appearances, balanced, dignified, non-political. But Meghan wanted a global platform. "Why shouldn't I speak on issues that matter?" she allegedly said. The room fell silent. Someone gently reminded her that royals must remain neutral. Meghan's response, according to Lady C's source, was chillingly simple. "Then maybe it's time to change what royal means." It was that attitude, that subtle defiance, that sparked what Lady Colin later called the invisible war. The Queen didn't strike back through statements or leaks. She struck through omission. Invitations became fewer. Appearances with Meghan were limited. Subtle signals were sent to the public. The monarch's patience was wearing thin. Yet, in public, Meghan maintained the image of harmony, curtsying sweetly, smiling beside Her Majesty, playing the dutiful Duchess. But those who looked closely saw the micro-expressions, the stiff posture, the forced grins, the lack of eye contact. Lady Colin once remarked, the Queen never needed to raise her voice. Her silence was enough to remind Meghan whose house she was in. But Meghan, instead of retreating, doubled down. She began appealing directly to public opinion, crafting a narrative through carefully curated media allies. Leaks began appearing, stories about her being misunderstood, about her struggles with royal restrictions, about her loneliness. Lady Colin says this was no accident. It was psychological warfare through headlines. She turned public empathy into a weapon, Lady C said. Every story that painted her as the victim chipped away at the Queen's authority. The Queen's advisors urged a response. "Your Majesty, the Sussexes are undermining the institution," one aide reportedly said. But the Queen refused to engage publicly. Her stance remained unchanged, calm, silent, dignified. She believed time would expose truth. But time wasn't on her side. Because Meghan and Harry's rebellion wasn't just emotional, it was strategic. The more they presented themselves as victims of the firm, the more sympathy they earned globally. Meghan's narrative of being silenced by the monarchy struck a chord with millions who saw her as a symbol of modern womanhood battling old power. And for the first time, the Queen's silence started working against her. Lady Colin recalls a particularly bitter irony. The Queen built her legacy on restraint. Meghan built hers on exposure. And in a world addicted to emotion, exposure always wins. Behind the scenes, the Queen's frustration grew. Not rage, frustration. She couldn't act, couldn't defend herself publicly. To do so would destroy the very mystique the monarchy relied on. So, she did what she'd always done, endured. But Lady C insists that endurance came at a cost. The Queen aged faster during those years, she said. The stress, the family fractures, the media circus, all of it weighed heavily. She never said it, but everyone around her felt it. By the time the Sussexes announced their decision to step back from royal duties, the war was over. Meghan had won the narrative. The Queen had kept her dignity. But the monarchy had lost something far greater, its control over the story. Lady Colin summarized it perfectly. Meghan didn't destroy the monarchy. She forced it to reveal its humanity. And that was the one thing it was never built to survive. Still, Lady C's revelations didn't end there. Because she claimed there was one confrontation, one private moment between Meghan and a senior royal, that changed everything. A moment that shattered the last fragile piece between the two worlds. And it wasn't with the Queen. It was with Prince William. Lady Colin calls it the warning that could have saved everything. If only Harry had listened. But he didn't. And what came next would tear the brothers apart in a way no one, not even the Queen herself, could repair. It was supposed to be just a conversation between brothers. A quiet word of advice from one future king to another man who'd always been his closest ally. But Lady Colin Campbell says that this wasn't a talk. It was the spark that set the royal house ablaze. William had seen the change in his brother long before the press did. The laughing, mischievous Harry who'd once cracked jokes at every public event was gone. In his place stood a man on edge, defensive, secretive, and fiercely protective of someone he'd only known for a short time. Meghan had become the center of Harry's universe, and everyone else, including his brother, was slowly being pushed to the periphery. Lady Colin claimed that William tried to be delicate at first. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't dismissive. He was cautious. "Are you sure about her, Harold?" he allegedly asked during a private chat. It wasn't an accusation, it was concern. The kind of question only an older brother could ask. But to Harry, it was betrayal. According to Lady C, the temperature in that room dropped instantly. Harry's jaw tightened. His hands, which had been resting on his knees, clenched into fists. "What's that supposed to mean?" he shot back. William, in typical calm fashion, tried to explain. He reminded Harry of the pressure that came with royal life, the scrutiny that destroyed their mother, the need to be absolutely certain. "You barely know her," he said. "Take your time." Those 4 words, "take your time," were the matchstick. Lady Colin described what followed as a volcanic outburst. Harry accused William of snobbery, of jealousy, of treating Meghan like an outsider. He defended her with a ferocity that startled even those closest to him. For Harry, this wasn't about logic, it was about loyalty. He had found someone who made him feel safe, validated, understood. And anyone who questioned that, even his own brother, became the enemy. Lady C said, it was as if Harry had been hypnotized. Meghan had become both his shield and his weapon. William left the conversation shaken. He hadn't intended to start a war. He'd tried to prevent one. But in Lady Colin's account, that confrontation cemented the divide. The brothers' bond, once unbreakable, was fractured beyond repair. What makes this moment so crucial, Lady C said, is that it marked the beginning of Harry's complete emotional isolation. Meghan allegedly reinforced the idea that his family didn't support him. Every disagreement became proof of her narrative, that they were alone against the institution. "It's us versus them," she would whisper. And Harry believed it. Lady Colin compared it to emotional conditioning, a slow erosion of trust. She made him question everyone's intentions, she explained, even the people who loved him most. Within months, that paranoia began to show. Harry started distancing himself from friends he'd known since Eton. He stopped confiding in aides he once trusted implicitly. Even longtime companions like Tom Inskip, who raised concerns about the speed of his relationship, were reportedly cut off. The once tightly knit brotherhood of royal men, William, Harry, and their shared advisors had splintered. The palace staff could feel it. Meetings became tense. Schedules were coordinated to avoid overlap. The brothers who once joked in public appearances now barely made eye contact. And through it all, Meghan maintained an air of calm. Polite. Composed. But Lady Colin claimed that behind closed doors, she fueled Harry's resentment, gently reminding him of every slight, every cold look, every unfair headline. She positioned herself as his only ally, Lady C said. The one person who truly had his back. That bond, built on shared pain, was unbreakable. Dangerous, even. When the palace tried to intervene, suggesting joint counseling or mediation, Harry reportedly refused. "We're fine," he said. But according to Lady C, he wasn't fine at all. He was unraveling, caught between his family's expectations and Meghan's emotional dependency. Lady Colin believed that Meghan saw in Harry a unique kind of power, not institutional, but emotional. He was Diana's son, she said. The people's prince. His name carried sympathy and rebellion in equal measure. By aligning herself with him, Meghan didn't just marry into the royal family. She inherited its most volatile weapon, public sentiment. And that weapon was about to be unleashed. But before the storm went public, Lady Colin said there were moments, tiny flashes, when the family still tried to reconcile. The Queen reportedly urged Charles to speak to his sons. Private meetings were arranged. But every time, the same pattern repeated. William would try to reach out, Harry would take it as an attack, and Meghan would retreat behind the shield of victimhood. She was a master at emotional inversion, Lady C said. She could make Harry feel guilty for defending her, then proud for doing it. At public events, the tension was palpable. Observers began noticing the distance. At the 2019 Commonwealth Day service, Meghan's frosty exchanges with the Cambridges became a viral moment. Lady Colin said it wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't an awkward moment, she said. It was a message. Meghan wanted the world to see that she didn't need their approval anymore. But the real tragedy, Lady Colin insists, wasn't the feud itself, it was what it did to Harry. She described him as emotionally cornered. Every attempt to balance his wife's needs and his family's expectations only deepened his guilt. The media's scrutiny, the palace bureaucracy, the relentless headlines, all of it fed into Meghan's narrative that the royals were toxic. He stopped seeing shades of gray, Lady C explained. In his mind, it was all or nothing. And then came the moment Lady Colin calls the final silence. William stopped trying. The calls became fewer. The texts shorter. The emotional exhaustion was mutual. One brother was trying to protect the institution. The other was trying to escape it. Both believed they were right. Lady Colin often points to one image that defined this era. The two brothers walking side by side at a memorial event. Their expressions solemn, their distance measurable. It wasn't hatred, she said. It was heartbreak. But for Meghan, Lady C claims, that separation was liberation. The fewer bridges Harry had to his family, the more dependent he became on her. It wasn't about malice, it was about control. If he ever doubted her, Lady Colin said, she could remind him of how alone he'd be without her. And it worked. When the rumors of a royal exit first surfaced, most dismissed them as media exaggeration. But Lady C says Meghan had been laying the groundwork long before. You don't walk away from royalty overnight, she said. You plan it. Harry's defiance, fueled by emotion and love, became the public justification for what was already a carefully constructed escape plan. Meghan wasn't running from the monarchy. She was repositioning herself beyond it. But before that plan could unfold, Lady Colin says there was one last confrontation that changed everything. One night, when words were exchanged, tears were shed, and a line was crossed that could never be uncrossed. It was the night Harry faced the ultimate choice, his family or his wife. And according to Lady C, it wasn't love that made his decision. It was fear, because that was the night of the suicidal ultimatum. The moment Meghan allegedly told him, "If you don't leave them, I can't live." The night that turned defiance into exile. The night that changed royal history forever. It was a cold evening in Windsor, the kind of night that swallowed sound. The palace lights were dim, and the corridors seemed to breathe with unspoken tension. Prince Harry had just returned from a long and bruising conversation with his father. Words had been said that couldn't be taken back. Promises had been broken. And waiting for him behind closed doors was Meghan Markle, the woman who, according to Lady Colin Campbell, would deliver the words that changed the course of royal history forever. Lady Colin doesn't call it an argument. She calls it a reckoning. She knew what she was doing that night, Lady C said. It wasn't chaos. It was control, emotional, surgical control. Harry entered the room tired, torn, and still angry from his meeting with Charles. Meghan was pacing, her eyes red, her voice trembling. She'd been crying, but it wasn't clear if it was sorrow, frustration, or strategy. Lady C describes this scene as a masterclass in emotional leverage. According to her sources, Meghan had confronted Harry earlier that week about his divided loyalties. She'd accused him of letting his family humiliate her, of choosing silence over protection. "They're destroying us," she allegedly cried. "And you're letting them." Harry, exhausted and guilt-ridden, had tried to reason with her. But reason wasn't what she wanted. She wanted allegiance. And that night, she was determined to get it. Lady Colin claims Meghan issued an ultimatum so dark, so emotionally charged, that it left Harry paralyzed. In tears, she allegedly told him, "If you don't leave them, I'll end it. I can't live like this anymore." Those words, whispered in anger, fear, or calculation, hung in the air like a curse. For Harry, they were more than just words. They were déjà vu. They echoed the one thing he'd feared all his life: the memory of his mother, Princess Diana, and the helplessness of watching someone he loved crumble under royal pressure. To him, this wasn't manipulation. It was trauma. It was a replay of the same nightmare he'd never escaped. And Meghan knew it. Lady Colin's account describes that moment as the psychological breaking point. She used the one weapon she knew he couldn't fight, his guilt, she said. She turned his greatest fear into her shield. Harry, torn between duty and love, crumbled. He reportedly broke down, begging her to calm down, promising he'd fix everything. "You don't have to do this," he pleaded. "I'll make it right." But Meghan, according to Lady C, was relentless. She spoke about how she'd been vilified, how the British tabloids were destroying her reputation, how the palace had failed to protect her. She claimed she felt unsafe, unwanted. And then came the line that would echo through royal history. "They'll never accept me, Harry, but they'll destroy you trying." Lady Colin said that was the moment Harry made his decision. Not out of calculation, not out of rebellion, out of sheer panic. He couldn't lose her, not the way he lost his mother. He saw Diana's ghost that night, Lady C said softly, and he decided he'd rather betray his family than relive her death. From that point on, everything changed. The next morning, palace staff noticed a strange stillness between Harry and Meghan, a kind of eerie calm that comes after emotional storms. Harry avoided eye contact with anyone. Meghan, on the other hand, seemed composed. Too composed. It was as if she'd just won something, one aide allegedly told Lady Colin. That same week, private calls began between Harry, his advisors, and lawyers outside the royal circle. Quiet inquiries about financial independence, legal definitions of royal titles, security arrangements abroad. The gears of Megxit were already turning, though the public wouldn't know for months. And behind the walls of Buckingham Palace, the whispers began. Something had happened. Something serious. Lady Colin says the Queen was informed that Meghan had expressed suicidal thoughts. The palace, in its centuries-old way, reacted not with compassion, but with containment. Senior aides, fearing scandal, advised discretion. They couldn't risk another Diana-level media catastrophe. Every royal hand was suddenly tied. They couldn't confront Meghan directly. They couldn't dismiss her pain without appearing cruel. They couldn't call it manipulation without proof. So they did what they always did. They stayed silent. But silence is dangerous when emotions turn into weapons. Meghan now held something even the Queen couldn't fight: moral leverage. The narrative of a woman on the brink, suffocated by royal cruelty, was more powerful than any palace protocol. And Harry, terrified, protective, loyal, became her echo. Lady Colin said. He became her voice because he thought saving her meant saving himself. In the weeks that followed, the emotional grip tightened. Meghan isolated him further, convincing him that everyone, from William to Charles, had turned against them. "They don't care if we live or die," she allegedly told him. "They just want to protect their image." That idea consumed Harry. It warped his perspective until he saw betrayal everywhere. Even the Queen's gestures, formal, careful, restrained, seemed cold. When she invited them to Sandringham to discuss their future, Meghan refused to attend, citing emotional distress. Harry went alone. Lady Colin said. That was when the palace realized they'd lost him completely. During that meeting, Charles and William tried desperately to reason with him. They pleaded for time, compromise, therapy, anything to slow down the spiral. But Harry's mind was made up. He wasn't just leaving because of love. He was leaving to protect her life. And in that tragic irony lies the power of Lady C's revelation. A prince trained to serve, protect, and uphold duty, manipulated into believing that abandoning all of it was the only way to save someone he loved. But while Harry was preparing to break free, the palace was preparing for war. They couldn't stop him, but they could contain the damage. Behind closed doors, contingency plans were drawn up. Public relations teams drafted statements. The Queen's advisors prepared for the fallout. Meanwhile, Meghan began setting the stage. Lady Colin claims that long before Megxit went public, she had already arranged private conversations with American media figures, lawyers, and brand consultants. She wasn't running from the monarchy, Lady C said. She was repositioning her empire. The night of the ultimatum, then, wasn't just emotional, it was strategic. It transformed Meghan from an ambitious duchess into a victim hero in the eyes of millions. And for Harry, it was the point of no return. When the announcement finally came, the joint statement declaring their intent to step back, the world gasped. But inside the palace, no one was surprised. Lady C says they'd seen it coming since that night. The emotional outburst, the desperation, the guilt, it had all been leading here. What no one expected was how fast it would unravel. Within days, Meghan and Harry were negotiating terms with the crown as if it were a business deal. They wanted to retain their titles, their brand, their privileges, but without responsibility. To the Queen, this was unthinkable. To Meghan, it was non-negotiable. Lady Colin calls it the illusion of freedom. Meghan convinced Harry they could be royal and independent at the same time, global icons without the burden of duty. But deep down, the palace knew the truth. Once you walk away, you don't come back. The Queen reportedly said, "You work for the monarchy, Harry. The monarchy doesn't work for you." Those words, once relayed to Meghan, infuriated her. And that fury, Lady C says, fueled the next stage of the plan, the move to America. But before the move, there was one final conversation that still haunts royal insiders. Lady Colin claims that Harry confided in a close friend one last time. She said she'd end her life if I don't protect her. He reportedly admitted, "I can't let that happen." To that friend, and later to Lady Colin's source, it sounded less like devotion and more like imprisonment. Harry wasn't protecting Meghan anymore. He was trapped by her pain. Lady Colin calls that night the emotional assassination of a prince. She didn't kill his body, she said. She killed his sense of belonging. And the aftermath was irreversible. The royal family was shaken. The staff, blindsided. The Queen, heartbroken. Because what happened that night wasn't just a family conflict. It was the collapse of the monarchy's most human connection. A grandson, believing he was saving his wife, unknowingly abandoned the one woman who had loved him unconditionally from birth, his grandmother, the Queen. Lady C's account ends that chapter with chilling precision. The night Meghan gave Harry that ultimatum, he thought he was choosing love. But in truth, he was choosing exile. And exile came faster than anyone imagined. Because what followed, the media storm, the panic at Buckingham Palace, and the unprecedented royal retreat, would not just reshape Harry and Meghan's future. It would redefine the monarchy itself. But the fallout wasn't just emotional. It was operational. Because as Lady C reveals next, the morning after that ultimatum, the palace went into lockdown. Not to protect Harry and Meghan, but to protect the crown. And what they did next would change the royal playbook forever. The morning after the ultimatum was not like any other at Buckingham Palace. The halls that usually buzzed with quiet efficiency were thick with unease. Something unspoken had shifted in the royal order, and though no one dared say it out loud, everyone knew. The Sussex situation had become a crisis. Lady Colin Campbell describes that morning as the most chaotic moment in the monarchy since Diana's death. Phones rang incessantly. Private secretaries whispered in corners. Courtiers hurried in and out of meeting rooms with faces pale as parchment. For the first time in decades, the palace wasn't in control of the story. And that, to the royals, was unforgivable. Because control is the monarchy's lifeblood. Every smile, every word, every silence is rehearsed. But Meghan and Harry had just introduced something the crown couldn't predict: emotion. Real, raw, volatile emotion. And it was leaking everywhere. Lady C's sources described a near-panic atmosphere that day. Palace staffers were divided into two groups: those who believed Meghan's emotional distress was genuine, and those who saw it as dangerous manipulation. The divide wasn't just ideological, it was generational. The older courtiers spoke of duty and discretion. The younger aides, more sympathetic to Meghan, whispered words like mental health and empathy. The palace didn't know which narrative to control, Lady Colin explained. If they expressed concern, they risked validating her story. If they stayed silent, they looked cruel. In that paralysis, chaos festered. The Queen, upon hearing of Meghan's emotional breakdown and the alleged suicidal ultimatum, summoned her private secretary immediately. Lady C claims that Her Majesty's first instinct was compassion, but her second was caution. The monarchy could not afford another Diana tragedy. "We must be seen to care," the Queen reportedly said. "But we must never lose control of the narrative." That line would define the palace's entire strategy moving forward. Behind the scenes, communications teams began drafting what Lady C called disaster responses. There were memos outlining possible press leaks, contingency statements, and prepared talking points in case Meghan's mental health claims became public. They were walking on eggshells. One wrong move, one careless phrase, and the monarchy could be painted as heartless, or worse, abusive. Meanwhile, Meghan and Harry remained locked away at Frogmore Cottage. No one was sure what they were planning. Staff members who had once been invited in freely were now turned away at the gate. Lady Colin said that even their personal protection officers reported feeling cut off from the usual royal chain of command. It was as if the Sussexes had created their own kingdom within the kingdom. And that scared the palace more than anything. Lady Colin recounted a conversation between two senior aides that morning. One allegedly said, "We've lost him." The other replied, "No, she's taken him." The distinction was important. Because, to the palace, Harry wasn't just a grandson. He was an asset, a bridge between the monarchy's fading mystique and the modern generation. Losing him to Meghan wasn't just emotional, it was symbolic. It meant the crown had been outmaneuvered by love. That afternoon, Prince Charles called an emergency meeting at Clarence House. According to Lady C, the topic wasn't how to help Meghan, it was how to contain her. The fear wasn't her distress, it was her potential to go public. If she tells her story, one advisor reportedly warned, "We'll be fighting ghosts." The Queen was briefed hourly. William, though furious with his brother, offered a single, measured warning: do not underestimate her. He understood Meghan's power, not through position or influence, but through perception. In an age of media empathy, all she needed to do was cry on camera, and the monarchy would bleed. And she knew it. Lady Collins said that by this point, Meghan had already positioned herself as the emotional victim of the royal machine. Every slight, every correction, every moment of discipline could now be reframed as cruelty. "It's the oldest game in power," Lady C said. "Make the institution look heartless, and you become the hero of your own story." That afternoon, a draft of what would later become the Sussexes' exit statement began circulating through the palace. It was blunt, almost businesslike, a declaration that they intended to step back from royal duties and work to become financially independent. The Queen hadn't approved it. Neither had Charles. But Meghan had already outlined her future, and Harry had signed his name to it. When that document leaked, and Lady Colin insists it was leaked deliberately, the palace's sense of control shattered completely. "It was like a coup," she said. "They didn't just leave quietly. They went public first, forcing the monarchy to react." That single move, Lady Colin argues, exposed how fragile the royal image really was. The crown's carefully curated silence suddenly looked like weakness. Meghan's emotional pleas became authenticity. Harry's defiance became bravery. And for the first time in modern history, the monarchy was on the defensive. The British media exploded with speculation. Was Meghan suicidal? Had the palace ignored her cries for help? Why had the royal family failed another woman the way they failed Diana? The parallels were too obvious, too tragic, and the monarchy was losing the public relations war by the hour. Inside the palace, Lady Colin said there was fury, but also fear. Senior courtiers scrambled to identify the leaks, but Meghan's network was impenetrable. She had cultivated allies in Hollywood, American journalism, and global advocacy circles. Every sympathetic article, every exclusive source, was part of what Lady C called Operation Freedom. Meghan wasn't running from the palace, she said. She was rebranding herself as its survivor. In response, Buckingham Palace crafted what they called the containment plan. It involved 3 stages.